Weddings are meant to be a celebration of love, but history tells us a different story. Across the centuries, countless marriages have been dictated by power, greed, and cruelty, rather than romance. Today, on Historical Chronicles, we explore cruel weddings and tragic marriages that shaped history. From child brides to forced political unions, these weddings were anything but fairy tales. Some led to scandal, others to war, and a few ended in tragedy. Let's take a look at some of history's most heartbreaking weddings. Number 1. The Wedding of Margaret Beaufort, 1455. At just 12 years old, Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII, was forced into marriage with Edmund Tudor, a man 12 years older. The War of the Roses had just started, and within a year, she was pregnant, and Edmund had been taken prisoner by the Yorkist forces. By 13, her traumatic childbirth nearly cost her life, and her husband had died of the plague in captivity. She was made a widow, and although she went on to marry 2 more times, she never had any more children. Years later, Margaret outlined a series of proper procedures for the delivery of potential heirs, possibly influenced by the mental and physical trauma she experienced at such a young age. Number 2. The Tragic Marriage of Joanna of Castile, 1496. Joanna of Castile, known as Joanna the Mad, was the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon. In 1496, she was married off to Philip the Handsome at 16. She adored him, but he was unfaithful and emotionally manipulative. In response to his affairs, Joanna could not contain her jealousy and would have violent rages, including cutting off one of his mistress's hair and stabbing her in the face, which fueled rumours of her instability. 10 years later, Philip died unexpectedly of typhoid. After his death, her own family, first her father and then her son, imprisoned her for nearly 50 years in a convent, ensuring she never held any true power. Number 3. Mary Stuart's forced marriage to Lord Bothwell, 1567. Some say that Mary, Queen of Scots, was abducted by James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, and was forced into marrying him 3 months after the suspicious death of her second husband, Lord Darnley, while others suggest that she pretended to be kidnapped and actually had a long affair with the Earl, which resulted in the conspiracy to murder Lord Darnley. Either way, the union was so scandalous that it led to her downfall. Her enemies rebelled as she had married a Protestant and a murder suspect. The marriage started a civil war, and when Mary and James's army was defeated, Mary was imprisoned and was forced to abdicate the throne. Things didn't turn out well for either of them. The Earl was imprisoned in Denmark, where he died 10 years later, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed by Queen Elizabeth I. Number 4. The infamous wedding of Marie de Medici and Henry IV of France, 1600. Marie de Medici's marriage to Henry IV was arranged for political gain. After divorcing his first wife, Margaret de Valois, he set his eyes on Marie, who came from the wealthy Medici family. Henry had borrowed large sums of money from Marie's father to fund his war effort, and it was agreed that the marriage would take place to wipe some of his debts, and her large dowry would also help financially. From the moment she arrived, she was sidelined for Henry's mistresses and was forced to socialise with them. Although they had 5 children, Marie couldn't control her jealousy and ended up sympathising with Henry's banished ex-wife, which eventually prompted Henry to allow Margaret back to Paris. Marie had to wait 10 years for her coronation due to her husband continually postponing the ceremony for political reasons. The day after her coronation, however, Henry IV was assassinated, and Marie served as regent of France between 1610 and 1617, as her son was too young to rule. She was later exiled by her own son, Louis XIII. Number 5. The marriage of Andrew Stoney and Mary Eleanor Bowes, 1777. Andrew Robinson Stoney, who styled himself as Captain Stoney, was a charming Irish man who managed to secure a marriage with one of the wealthiest women in Britain. Mary Eleanor Bowes, Countess of Strathmore, was a young widow with 5 children. Her widowhood granted her the freedom to make her own choices, including who to marry. After meeting the Countess, Stoney orchestrated a dramatic duel, supposedly to defend her honour. During the staged fight, he claimed to have been mortally wounded. He requested to see the Countess, and as his dying wish, he asked her to marry him. She agreed to a rushed marriage to ease the suffering of a man she thought was at death's door. However, Stoney made a miraculous recovery, and the Countess soon found herself trapped in a nightmare. He quickly squandered her wealth, subjected her to relentless abuse, and kept her under house arrest. His cruelty extended beyond his wife. He assaulted maids and fathered illegitimate children. But with the help of loyal servants, the Countess managed to escape, and she didn't stop there. At a time when divorce was both scandalous and exceedingly rare, she took the extraordinary step of filing for divorce. It was a huge risk as she could have lost her inheritance, but she was intelligent and determined. Even when Stoney kidnapped her and held a gun to her head demanding she stop, she had the courage to refuse and was eventually granted a divorce. Her case shocked the public with the full extent of the horrors she endured at the hands of her ruthless husband. Number 6. The future King George IV had a secret wife, 1785. The Prince of Wales, the eldest son of King George III, was a pleasure-loving patron of the arts. Though he kept numerous mistresses and fell in and out of affairs, he gave his heart in 1784 to Maria Fitzherbert, 6 years his senior. She was a widow twice over and a Catholic. This violated the Royal Marriages Act, which forbid a royal from marrying a Catholic, but George secretly wed her anyway. The marriage was never legally recognised. If consent had been given and the marriage been legal, the Prince of Wales would have been automatically removed from the succession to the British throne. On the 23rd of June 1794, Maria Fitzherbert was informed by letter that her relationship with the prince was over, and the prince told his brother that they had parted amicably. This leads us to number 7. The marriage of Princess Caroline and the future George IV, 1795. After his marriage to Maria Fitzherbert, George, the Prince of Wales, was forced to marry his first cousin, Caroline of Brunswick, who he had never met. But being heavily in debt, he agreed to the marriage because Parliament had stated that if he married an eligible princess, they would increase his allowance. On the 8th of April 1795, at the Chapel Royal, St James's Palace, George stood drunk at the altar and married his cousin. Later, George made it clear that he regarded Caroline as an unattractive, unhygienic woman who spoke her mind too readily. Similarly, Caroline complained that the prince was very fat and was nothing like as handsome as his portrait. In a letter to a friend, she said, "On the wedding night, George was so drunk that he passed the greatest part of his bridal night under the grate, where he fell and where I left him." 9 months later, however, their only child Charlotte was born, but just 3 days after this, George made out a new will and said, "I bequeath all my worldly property to my Maria Fitzherbert, my wife, the wife of my heart and soul." While to Caroline he left 1 shilling. George soon refused to live with Caroline and wanted a separation. He sent her a letter saying, "We have unfortunately been obliged to acknowledge to each other that we cannot find happiness in our union. Let me therefore beg you to make the best of a situation unfortunate for us both." By August 1797, Caroline moved to her own residence and the couple never lived together again. When George became king, he tried to divorce her and barred her from the coronation ceremony, but the public rallied behind his estranged wife, and the divorce never went ahead. On his deathbed, George requested that a miniature eye of Maria Fitzherbert was to be put around his neck and buried with him, which was done as requested. Number 8. Edward Gibbon Wakefield, kidnapped an heiress and forced her to marry him, 1826. Edward Gibbon Wakefield, a 30-year-old diplomat, conspired with his brother to kidnap 15-year-old Ellen Turner, the daughter of a wealthy industrialist, and manipulate her into marriage, hoping to secure her fortune. This wasn't the first time, though. 10 years prior, he had done the same to another unfortunate young woman and had managed to secure £70,000 from her family. When the young woman died in childbirth and the money had ran out, he set his sights on Ellen Turner, but this time her family fought back. Edward sent a letter to Ellen's father stating that they were married and that he expected the Turners to accept the marriage rather than face a public scandal. Instead, Ellen's father went to London and asked for help from the Foreign Secretary. Learning that his daughter had been taken to France, he sent his brother accompanied by a police officer and a solicitor. There, they soon found the couple staying in a hotel, but Edward claimed that as they were married, Ellen could not be taken from him by force. Thankfully, the French authorities allowed Ellen to leave the country with her uncle, and Edward wrote a statement confirming that Ellen was still a virgin. The marriage was annulled, and the British Foreign Secretary issued a warrant for Edward's arrest. When he arrived in Dover a few days later, he was arrested, and at the trial was sentenced with his brother to 3 years in prison. Number 9. Camila O'Gorman was executed for posing as the wife of an Argentine priest, 1848. Camila O'Gorman belonged to a wealthy family in Buenos Aires. At 19, she fell in love with Father Ladislao Gutierrez, a 23-year-old priest. But society at the time wouldn't allow a marriage between the couple, and their relationship was considered a scandal, so the couple fled the city. They never officially married, but they lived together as husband and wife for about 5 months in Goya, Argentina, where they established a school. During this time, Camilla became pregnant, and despite their attempts to build a new life, they were unfortunately discovered and were arrested. The government viewed their actions as scandalous and put them both on trial. From 1829 to 1852, the Argentine Confederation was governed as a single-party state by Juan Manuel de Rosas. Camila was good friends with Rosas's daughter, who tried to help her, and even set up a room in a convent in the hope that Camila would be allowed to stay there. However, Rosas had other ideas. He removed the administration of justice from the courts and took it upon himself to sign a decree ordering their immediate executions, even though Camilla was heavily pregnant at the time. Sadly, they were both sentenced to death by firing squad alongside each other. These tragic unions remind us of the power struggles, betrayals, and tragic fates faced by brides and grooms throughout history. Which story surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Historical Chronicles. Thank you for watching. See you next time.